It is no stretch to say that anime is my lifeblood. Ever since I was a wee little lad watching Akira and Tenchi Muyo with my friend, I've been spending pretty much my entire life watching literally anything that I can get my grubby little hands on. I truly love anime and will always love anime, and thus will take any opportunity I can to share that love. And what better way to do it than to bestow upon you, my viewer, my top 10 anime of all time. Now, to be honest, after watching over 2,200 shows, this is a feat that's not easily handled. Ask me in 2 minutes what my top 10 is, and I will probably no doubt give you a completely different list. Some might be based on recency bias, some might stand the test of time, but no matter what it is, take it or leave it. Sure, it won't be your favorites, and yes, many will be controversial to like, but I hope that in it, you'll find at least one new show to try and that you'll enjoy it. As with any of my lists, before you leave, be sure to go down in the comments down below and let me know what your top favorite anime are of all time. It's always great to see folks come together, share each other's taste, and see what others like. With all that out of the way, let's dive into my top 10 favorite shows of all time in no particular order. First things first, let's talk about the greatest anime comedy of all time. Yes, Nichijou, My Ordinary Life. This show is just pure comedy gold, and with Kyoto Animation adapting it, they did an absolutely wonderful job on it. It's one of those shows that every single time I run into a clip, I immediately stop what I'm doing and watch it. It's one of those shows that I can fire up an episode and I'll immediately be sucked right in. It is just so well done. The main key things here is this: it's a very skit-based comedy where you'll kind of jump around to different perspectives. We have like a bunch of school kids that are going to school and just absolute shenanigans happens. You have the teacher's perspectives every now and then, some random cat in the street. You have this girl, that's a very young girl, it's a professor that has actually made a sentient robot, and she keeps messing with it, like opening its fingers and making its fingers shoot off or whatever. It's so well done. And to have Kyoto Animation on board with it, the animation just goes crazy at times. It's kind of similar to something like Maid Dragon here recently, where even though it is a comedy series, Kyoto Animation be Kyoto Animation. Like, they just go absolutely nuts with it. Throw in there like absolutely incredible musical scores that are in there. It's like, this is a comedy and the music's better than most other shows. They hit the comedic beats so perfectly with it. The sound effects, all the different sound cues they have for different comedic beats, it's all just perfectly done. Like, this is a show that just through and through, I can't stop watching it once I start watching. It's one of those ones that every now and then I go, was it as funny as I remember? I fire up an episode and I'm laughing and I'm watching the entire episode. It is just one of those shows that just, it never, ever gets old. And it's easily one of the best anime of all time. But my next one I have is Showa Genroku, Rakugo Shinju. This is a series that is just an absolute classic for me. Every single time I think about it, I just immediately want to watch it. It's a period-piece drama that takes place after the war, where you have Japan is opening up its borders, entertainment itself is slowly evolving, and we follow Yakumo, who at his young age, he becomes an apprentice to become a Rakugo performer. For those who don't know what Rakugo is, it essentially is a single-man entertainment where they go out on this stage, they sit on their knees on this pillow, and they act out this entire play by themselves. They typically will have like maybe a fan as a prop or something, but they act out all the voices and everything themselves. And Yakumo is not alone in actually becoming an apprentice. He's joined with Sakurako. Now, the thing between the two of them is as they become Rakugo performers, they see Rakugo differently. Whereas Sakurako wants to evolve Rakugo itself to be more modern and actually, play into what people want with the evolving entertainment industry, Yakumo is all about tradition. Sticking to the old traditions of Rakugo itself. And so you have a lot of the two of them kind of butting heads as to what people will be entertained by. But the cool thing about this story is that it follows Yakumo's entire life. Like, again, from the point in which he's very young and he becomes an apprentice, all the way until the point where he's old and rotting away. It's his entire life story, and it's such an incredible story. There's so many aspects of like regrets. There's so many choices the characters make, the struggles they go through, the romances they go through, again, becoming a Rakugo performer, their success, their failures, all that stuff kind of boiling up all the way until their later years. And it's honestly one of Studio Dean's best adaptations because the work they put into this was just absolutely amazing. I cannot express enough. Rakugo itself is not like the most entertaining performance for a lot of people, including myself. I've seen actual live Rakugo performances. They're not that entertaining. But Studio Dean, what they did with the performances was just absolutely incredible. Just all the subtle details of the character, their movements, whenever they're uncomfortable, their feet kind of shifting a little bit underneath them, the sweat beating down their face as they're acting out the performance. And yes, The voice actors themselves, the incredible job they did to actually portray these performances was just so amazingly done. I cannot express enough. If you're looking for an amazing full life story of a character and all the twists and turns they go through, it is an absolute masterpiece. Please go check it out. For my next show, let's get into a controversial pick, a show that a lot of people probably won't like seeing in a top 10 list, but anybody that has been following my channel for a while now are not going to be surprised. Yes, Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation. I absolutely adore this show, and I'm so grateful to have watched this show because it has introduced me to literally my favorite properties of all time, which is the Mushoku Tensei novel series. For those that don't know what Mushoku Tensei is, it follows a deadbeat NEET who is an absolute leech to his family, spending all of his day inside of his room. He's a shut-in because of a situation where he was bullied when he was younger. Well, after his parents die, the rest of his family kick him out of the house, at which point he gets hit by a truck. At which point, Truck-kun sends him to another world, a fantasy world, where unfortunately, a lot of his trauma from his previous life doesn't leave him. He still remains locked up inside of the house that he was born in, but over time in this new world, he starts to kind of open himself up more. He starts to learn more about the world itself, and eventually kind of breaking out of that shell that he's in. Easily, season 1 of Mushoku Tensei was just an absolute masterpiece. Visually, music-wise, backgrounds, just everything was absolutely immersive and beautifully done. But the thing that's always really intrigued me and I've loved so much about the Mushoku Tensei franchise is its willingness to be raw, dirty, and unfiltered. I love the realistic nature of a character who's willing to kind of show all those nasty blemishes that are inside of him, and really getting into the psyche of the character himself, despite the fact that he's extremely controversial, he's extremely nasty, and yes, I don't condone a lot of things that he does. It does open the door to kind of seeing a lot of the growth in his character over the period of time of the story. As the author himself puts, it's just more about a character who's willing to kind of move forward, and that willingness to kind of open the door for him so that he can start seeking out a new future and a life that he wasn't able to achieve before. Yes, this is a character that was bullied and SA'd in his previous life, and that really messed with his brain to the point where, yes, he's a very perverted and nasty individual. But it's seeing that growth, it's seeing him kind of trudging forward and meeting new people and expanding into the world itself, which is an absolutely incredible world full of some really great twists and turns that I love absolutely every single minute of it. Add into that, having some of the best characters that I've seen in storytelling. I love Roxy so much. I love Sylphie. I love Edis. I love Ghislaine. I love Paul. I love Orsted. I love all these characters in this world, and I want to know more about them. It's just that kind of world. A world full of characters that have massive flaws, that do horrible things, but in that shows you that nature of humanity. That aspect that people, yes, are flawed individuals, and I love it for that. For my next pick, even though I don't have this entire thing ordered, if you ask me probably what is the #1 anime of all time, this is probably it. Neon Genesis Evangelion. This is a series that has easily stood the test of time. There's a lot of shows in the 90s and 80s and even early 2000s that are really incredible shows, but a lot of them, they don't stand the test of time. Like if you watch them now, they just don't work anymore, or they're just not paced very well. But Evangelion is just in a world of its own. It is literally something that was crafted and became absolute gold, and there's a reason why it's an absolute classic for many people. It takes place in a world that is being currently attacked by these monstrous beings that they call the Angels, and the only way to fight back, because conventional weapons don't work, this organization known as NERV has created the Evas, which then they send out to actually fight the Angels. The only problem is they can only be piloted by children. Thus enter Shinji, one of the most hated characters of all time that I think is actually a really incredible character. And Shinji is being forced by his father, who runs NERV, to pilot one of these Evas. And yes, it hurts. Because you actually have to link yourself into the Eva, and whatever hurts the Eva actually hurts the pilot. And so this really screws up Shinji's head. But yes, there's other pilots like Rei Ayanami and Best Girl Asuka who join in with their own Evas, and they fight the Angels. And then over time, we got to see more of the world itself. What are the Angels? And it gets into more political intrigues and all that kind of stuff. But through and through, Neon Genesis Evangelion is just an absolute masterpiece. It's golden. Like it's untouched through the ages. And I think it will remain one of those classics that just keep going throughout the years. It has the incredible animations that was put into it. Like, even to the day standards, the 2D animations they did back then was just a bar above everything else. Like, we don't get budgets like that for 2D animations anymore. It was just something that could never really happen again unless a studio wants to go under. I think the things that kind of really sell it is that it's got that amazing animation put into it, the great detail put into the actual mechanics of the robots and whatnot. But additionally, like the sound effect, the weight given to the machines itself, it's just something that's really not really captured in any other property that I've seen. Like when you see these feet hit the ground next to these buildings and cars and you see everything kind of swooping around it, the pressure that it builds, the sound effect, the echo throughout the area, all that stuff is so beautifully done. Like to this day, the opening segments where Shinji first comes there and the angel comes into the area and there's explosions going off, the scale is so beautifully portrayed. Then in that, yes, like everything else in the world, like it's so beautifully crafted, like the technology and the screens and all the mechanics and the plug suits and all the machinery that has to kind of run to kind of send the Eva up. It's just perfection. Like everything about this show is perfection. And that's not even getting to Shinji and his psyche and what he's kind of going through and the trauma that he's dealing with his father calling him back and him actually having to pilot the things and the weight of not being able to save everybody, people getting injured in the town and that weighing upon Shinji, him not wanting to go out there and feel the pain again and getting yelled at people for doing the wrong thing even though he thinks he's doing the right thing. There's just so much in the psyche of Shinji himself, Asuka, Rei, all these characters just have so many skeletons in the closets, or they're putting the skeletons in the closet. Like, this is just a beautifully done show. Yes, you can have your arguments about how the actual TV series ended, but I've watched the TV series, the movies, and even gotten to the rebuilds, and every single bit of it, I absolutely love it, except for maybe the very end of the movie series rebuilds. That aside, there's very few shows where I'll claim that whole, like, 90s golden age of anime. You have to go watch everything golden age of anime. Evangelion is one of the few ones that I can say honestly, yes, you have to go watch it. Up next, we have yet another isekai. Yes, this will be my last one. Don't worry. Don't worry. Yes, ReZero, starting life in another world. This show is absolutely incredible, and it has been incredible ever since I first started watching it with its first season. It was incredible in season 2, and season 3 is just equally as incredible. Unlike Mushoku Tensei, this one opens up with Subaru, who's just currently leaving a convenience store, and then suddenly he finds himself warped into another world, into the middle of the streets of this one big massive kingdom. He immediately thinks, man, I've been isekai, time to get my OP abilities, save the heroine, become a hero, all this kind of stuff, but unfortunately he doesn't have any powers. He does get wrapped up in trying to help this girl that he immediately falls in love with, Emilia. Point he gets pulled into this whole situation where he ends up dead. Now, the trick in the series is that he has this special ability called Return by Death, at which point, if he dies, he returns back to a checkpoint. But the unfortunate thing is that nobody remembers what happened except for him. So this kind of turns this whole thing where he's using what he learns through each of these loops in order to get the good end, but unfortunately, yes, most of the time ending up dying over and over and over again. This gets into a bigger plot line as the girl that he wants to help out is actually a royal candidate for this royal selection, and thus you have a lot of people that want to kill her. You get into the witches cult that they want to kill her as well, meeting all the other royal selection members, such and such. What makes ReZero so incredible is, one, I think White Fox, the studio that's working on this, is doing a really good job with the adaptation. Yes, I get a little bugged about the idea there's some things that are apparently being skipped with skipped content stuff, but it's still a really incredibly paced series, besides what a lot of people would probably argue with the whole white whale stuff. What's so great about the series is threefold. One, I think the whole Return by Death thing, while not overplayed, and they could have easily overplayed it, does present a very interesting aspect of Subaru's character, and the idea that whenever he resets, all the stuff that he's done before is reset, and this kind of messes with his head a little bit, and the idea that he feels like he's doing more than what most people see that he's doing. Whereas he's dying multiple times to help Emilia, and then he gets frustrated with Emilia that she doesn't appreciate how much he's dying for him because she doesn't know about it. Getting really friendly with one person like Rem, and then the next loop, Rem comes to kill him because she doesn't know who he is. This is stuff that really kind of messes with his psyche, and yes, often in cases leads him to be very frustrated and kind of lash out, but it's that kind of stuff that really does intrigue me. I like getting into that kind of psyche stuff that really kind of messes with Subaru's head. The second big thing is that, yes, the characters are really incredible in this series. Like, every single character that pops up in the series so far, I've just immediately am intrigued by. I'm either in love with them because their design's so great and their characters are so great, or I'm just intrigued to see more about them. Even the villains are super intriguing to me. My stomach drops whenever one shows up because they're so massively OP. And I'm always curious to see how Subaru is going to overcome them. And I just want to learn more about them. What are they after? What's driving them? And what really kind of makes them tick? And the third thing is world building. Like this writer, Tape, is just an absolutely incredible world builder. Like getting into like so many things about it, like the mechanics, the witches, the witches cult, what are they after? All that kind of stuff, their powers. I can't get enough of it. Like it's one of those series where as he kind of answers one question, he creates like 5 more questions. And I'm super intrigued to kind of see where it goes. I absolutely love the series so far. Easily one of those ones that it's like fighting with Mushoku Tensei is the best isekai of all time. But it's kind of one of those things where I love them each for their own reasons. Like with ReZero, it's a lot about like the consistency of the studio and how they've been adapting it and a lot of the characters they have in there and really kind of just the world building that they're doing. Whereas Mushoku Tensei is more like psychological. It's getting into the characters, the raw natures of them and trauma and all that kind of stuff. I cannot suggest enough. Easily one of my favorite shows of all time. For my next one I have is Bungou Stray Dogs. My gosh, this series is absolutely fantastic. It was a series that honestly, when I first got into it, I wasn't sure I was going to like. It's got a lot of pretty boys in it, and it's definitely kind of a turnoff for me. But what I found when I got into it is really just an amazing cast of characters and so many amazing characters. It essentially opens up with this Atsushi who ends up getting roped into this group, which is called the Armed Detective Agency. And essentially in this area, many people have what they call gifts or like superpowers, basically. And even though you have like the police are kind of taking care of everything during the day or whatever, you essentially have the Armed Detective Agencies kind of keeping control of the gifted during the day, whereas this other organization known as the Port Mafia takes care of things during the night. And they all kind of have like a little bit of a peaceful agreement amongst them, but every now and then things, of course, kind of unfold and they end up getting into arguments and fights. Over the span of the 5 seasons that we've had so far, it has definitely taken so many different twists and turns as different groups kind of come forward. You have the Guild from America that kind of comes in. At some point, they want to get certain gifted that have really incredible powers and control them. And it kind of just turns into a lot of tug and pull as to who's going to take over the area, seize control and whatnot. It's honestly one of those series that as it goes along, it just gets progressively better and better. It was almost like one of those writers that as they get further into their series, their craft just gets better and better. Or it could just be an aspect that they have all this stuff pre-plotted. But either way, like this writer is absolutely genius when it comes to kind of interweaving so many different characters with so many personalities, so many driving forces, so many backstories. Every single backstory that I've gotten into so far, like you're here recently getting at Akiko, has been just absolutely gut-wrenching at the same time, just beautifully weaved into the current storylines. This writer is just kind of a masterclass at doing that, and every single time they pull it off, I'm just super intrigued. It's also kind of one of those series where, despite the fact that yes, there's a lot of play off of the authors that each of the characters actually based off of. Yes, there's a character that's Rampo, there's a character that's Dazai. There's a lot of kind of interweaving to the actual author themselves. Even though I'm like not really that book smart, it still doesn't hold back the series. But I think if you are a massive book nerd, you might actually find that to be kind of a massive plus for the series. Either way, I love it. I can't wait for more. Even though that we've finally got caught up to the source material, I cannot wait to see where it goes next. Moving on to my next one, a newcomer to my list, and a series that honestly I didn't really have much of a hesitation putting it in my top 10 of all time after watching through it and completing it, and that is Frieren Beyond Journey's End. Yes, this series is just, it's absolute gold. Like, it's one of those series where you cannot find really faults in it if you really enjoy it. I know there's a group of people that really don't like it. It's one of those series that for me personally, I can't really find any faults in it. It's just so beautifully adapted. It has incredible music design, incredible characters. I love the depth of the story itself. It's just a very pure fantasy series in a world full of isekais. What really makes Frieren work for me is I just love Frieren's story so freaking much. It is a story about an elf who's lived a long time, and yes, as we find out later on through the story, she's somebody that has purposely secluded herself to the point where she doesn't really understand the minds of those around her who are short-lived. And sure enough, when eventually she does join the hero's party, they go out, they defeat the demon lord, return back home. It's at that point where she loses somebody that she didn't really know that she had a connection to, which is the hero Himmel, that she finally kind of snaps out of it. Like, she finally realizes all the things that she's sort of been missing this entire time, due to what she's been kind of molded to do her entire life. And what comes from this is that she goes back to Heiter, who was their healer of the group. He ends up pushing upon her an apprentice, Fern, and Fern and her end up traveling all the way to the north to go to this one place where they claim that you can actually see the spirits of the dead, and at which point she can finally, say to Himmel what she always should have said before. But during this entire long travel, she's actually basically taking the route that the hero's party took. And so she is looking upon a lot of things that she overlooked before. All these different memories are kind of sweeping back into her of her time with Himmel and the rest of the hero's party. And yes, at this point, finally acknowledging what was so special about that moment. It's a really interesting look into the mind of somebody who just sees time differently and how she can learn to appreciate what she never appreciated before. And in that, yes, I love Fern. She's an absolute kid, even though she tries to act grown up, and yes, technically is always having to take care of Fern like she's her mother. You have Stark, who's this person that just lacks a spine, but at the same time wants to be brave. And yes, getting into all the other characters they end up introducing whenever they go into the whole trials later on, it's just every single character they introduce in the story, I end up really, really liking. And like I said before, Madhouse did an absolutely incredible job adapting the series. It was just absolutely incredibly animated. Like, this is one of those cases where even though it feels like, again, back in the 90s where there was so much budget put into anime, it's kind of seeing that return back. Like seeing a show that has so much animation and timing put into it, like it doesn't feel like they rushed anything. Like, it felt like it was given plenty of time to breathe, and the studio had plenty of time to work with, and it had a lot of passionate people behind it to create something that was just a masterpiece visually. And in that, just absolutely incredible music pieces, the sound effects, all that kind of stuff, just all adds up to literally a masterpiece. I cannot express enough. If you have the patience for it, because it is a very slow moving show, if you have the patience for it, this is a really beautiful look into a fantasy world. For my next one, be it the old adaptation, be it the new adaptation, I'm probably more sold on the new adaptation more so now because we do have pretty much a confirmation that it's going to continue on. But yes, Spice and Wolf. I absolutely love Spice and Wolf so much. And if I had to kind of condense it down to one major thing, this show's chemistry is just so well done. It follows Kraft Lawrence, who is a traveling merchant. And yes, he travels all across these lands all by himself as he trades one thing to another area, gets a new kind of resource, takes it to another area, sells it there. Well, one day he ends up going to this one village that has a harvest god that's actually taking care of the harvest there. Well, as he's leaving that village, that harvest god ends up becoming a freeloader and sneaking into his wagon as he's leaving. Her name is Holo, the Wise Wolf. And even though he kind of protests at first, he ends up really liking the conversations that he's having with Holo, being the fact that he's always alone as he travels, that he decides to let her come along with him. Her goal in the end is that she wants to return back to the north where her homeland is, and he ends up agreeing to kind of take her there. And what precedes this is the two of them traveling together. Kraft Lawrence, who is this traveling merchant doing all of his trades at the same time, getting a little help from Holo the Wise Wolf because she has her own little abilities that she can kind of offer him. He has the knowledge about the currencies and what things kind of cost typically and how to negotiate with people. Whereas Holo the Wise Wolf, she has her ears so that she can hear that somebody's lying, or she kind of puts her own little knowledge that she has from her many years of being alive. Add to that the fact that the two of them, over time, just kind of get to know each other, get to bonding with each other, kind of support each other in their own ways. Holo herself feeling kind of abandoned because the world itself has kind of moved on from believing in the gods, and we're focusing on, yes, the church and their belief in the one god. Lawrence himself has his own struggles, his desires and his dreams of becoming a owner of his own shop so that he can stop having to move around and travel everywhere alone. But it's really in kind of the chemistry between the two of them that I just absolutely adore because yes, Holo being the Wise Wolf and very kind of uppity about herself, and she's very full of herself. At the same time, she just loves teasing Lawrence. At the same time, Lawrence just kind of keeps shooting it back every now and then. It's just their chemistry and how they communicate with each other is just so fantastic. I just love it. Through and through, I just absolutely love the franchise, and I'm so glad that it's getting another adaptation, and there's a lot of signs that they can possibly be doing a full adaptation, which I think it deserves. It's kind of one of those long-running franchises that has just been beloved for the longest time, that it's always been sort of a question mark as to why it's never gotten a full adaptation. For my next one I have is the Monogatari series. I absolutely adore this franchise, whether it be Bokuyaba Monogatari second season, Hana Monogatari, Kizu Monogatari, whatever it is, all of them into one thing, the Monogatari series. I absolutely love this series. If I had to say the one main reason, it's really just the chemistry and the dialogue itself. You could just, it's literally bickering the anime. have two characters in a scene just talking about the most oddball thing and making it into some massive, massive ordeal that can span an entire episode. And it's so incredibly done. Nisio Oisin, the writer of the series, he's a genius. Like, through and through, he's a genius. But the really cool thing about the adaptation anyway, this anime itself, is yet, yes, for those that know who Nisio Oisin is, he's somebody that loves to play with words. And I think this is one of those series that would never have been adapted if it weren't for the fantastic people at Shaft that actually adapted this. They did an incredible job of taking something that is so odd and not very visual and making it visual. They created literally something that should never exist in the end. But no, for those who don't know what the series is, it follows Araragi, who at some point in his past makes some pact with his vampire. And what comes from that is that he keeps running into different oddities or supernatural beings, gods, and all whatnot. So everybody he ends up bumping into on a street or something like that has something about them. Like the very first one that he runs into is Shinju, and she is, for some reason, light as a feather. And yes, it gets into, yes, this thing that is cursing her, her whole experience that she dealt with her family, this cult and everything, and how it kind of messed her up. Yes, getting into other characters like Sengoku gets wrapped up with this snake. Hanekawa, who every night for some reason turns into this hot cat girl and goes around attacking people. All these kind of stresses and whatnot the characters are going. It's really just like multifaceted because, yes, it gets into the character, what they're dealing with, their current circumstances, this trauma they're dealing with, how this certain oddity itself gets involved with them, and how Araragi himself has to figure out some way to help them out with it. In not all cases just completely expel it, but in some cases just kind of cope with it. And during this whole kind of exchange, like I said before, it's just this incredible dialogue exchange that are happening between the characters that in a lot of cases are just kind of very silly, very fun, but at the same time, yes, having some depth in there as well. I think it's just, again, something that shouldn't exist, that just absolutely just is pulled off by the people that worked on it, and yes, the incredible writing that Nisio Oisin put into it. I cannot express enough. This show is visually artistic and just full of some of the best character chemistry that you'll find really in anything. 10 out of 10 show, cannot recommend it enough. The only real kind of downside that I think I've ever really had most people say, and I kind of agree with it, is the fact that because of how wordy it is and how like very niche it is, it's a series that does not have yet and probably never will have an English dub. But for me and many other people, it's perfectly fine because, my gosh, the cast behind this is absolutely incredible in Japanese. And finally, last but not least, my last show in my top 10 list of anime of all time is Dangers in My Heart. Yes, a newcomer to my list, and there's a very good reason for that. When I watched Dangers in My Heart, there was one thing that really kept popping into my head every single episode that I watched of this show. One, my gosh, this show just keeps getting better and better. How can it outdo itself? Why does it keep getting better? Eventually it's going to fall off, right? Eventually this high is going to go away, right? No, it's not letting up. But additionally, the other thing that kept popping in my head is this is literally my favorite romance anime of all time. Honestly, I'm a bit of a stickler when it comes to romance and anime. In a lot of cases, I just don't feel it. It feels off somehow. It doesn't feel natural. But this is the first time where I watched the show and it just hit for me. Like it just clicked for me. It felt natural. And I really did feel the relationship between the characters. And there's a couple reasons why I think that does work that way. And I'll get into them in a minute. But this series essentially follows Ichikawa, and he is this guy that has a lot of really dangerous thoughts. He's just somebody that secluded himself from other people. He reads nothing but mystery novels for murders and whatnot, and he always has this twisted mind, always thinking about death. And yes, one of the targets of his thoughts of death is this girl that's in his class, Yamada. She's a very popular girl. She's actually a model as well. And he just loves to think about the idea of loving to see her just covered in blood, just a part of one of these murder mysteries and whatnot, just dead. Well, eventually, he ends up running into Yamada as he's hiding away inside the library, which he typically does on a regular basis. And through these like little chance encounters with her there, he eventually starts to communicate with her and they start to get to know each other. And just something kind of sort of blossoms between the two of them. He kind of finds himself shifting from, yes, always thinking unpleasant thoughts about her, to now wanting to kind of speak up when she's kind of struggling with something. Like if she's in the front of the class and she messes up, he'll kind of speak up to kind of keep people distracted while she kind of recovers herself. But there's really a massive change in this story, at which point, like I said before, that it grabbed me and it wouldn't let me go. And that was the point in which Yamada gets hit in the face with a ball. And yes, this is a girl who is a model. She has a lot of responsibilities that she's trying to fulfill for her mother and her agent. And so when she gets hit in the face with the ball, she kind of breaks. And this kind of stirs something inside of Ichikawa. He suddenly finds that he might actually like this girl because he's suddenly caring for her a lot. And again, ever since that moment that happened, ever since then, the story just keeps getting better and better, getting into Ichikawa and his insecurities, and yes, technically the barriers that he created around himself to seclude himself. This feeling that he's not good enough. I always argue that the first season really is the defining factor of Ichikawa learning to love himself before he can love other people. Whereas getting into the second season is getting more into Yamada and the work that she does, and yes, the relationship that can possibly build between the two of them. The character interaction between the two of them, the struggles, all they're going through, and yes, it's all very beautifully portrayed by Shinju Animation. This is a studio that I'm not really always kind of keeping an eye on, but for at least Dangers in My Heart, they did a really incredible job. The character designs themselves, the emotional points in the story, and yes, the absolutely beautiful music. I cannot express enough. I typically don't pay attention to music that much, but my gosh, the musician that worked on this series, they did an absolutely incredible job with this one. Just the notes that actually accent the emotional points of the story, it just hits me in the gut. It's almost like I feel the emotion along with hearing the emotion while seeing the emotion. It's just such a beautiful show. And like I said before, I don't really typically like romance or really feel the romance in a lot of series, but this one it hit me. Like, it's like one of those shows where I'm like, I fully understand why the two of them just really kind of work for each other. Additionally, one of the more unique aspects of the story so far, and this might change later on in the adaptations or in the manga itself, but we never get a perspective or inner thought processes of Yamada herself. Everything that we have to pick up from Yamada and how she feels about the situation is through body language and what she says. And I think that's kind of a very interesting way of sort of telling her story, because in a lot of cases, we don't really know how she feels, but we can see in her motions how she feels. So if she's struggling with something, it's usually through her fidgeting or kind of fumbling over something. And I love kind of trying to read her character. And since the studio itself and the team that was working on it were doing so well adapting the show, we were actually able to kind of read that. Like, through those subtle motions, I'm going, holy crap, I actually know what she's thinking. Thank you, studio, for doing so well at kind of showing that rather than her actually having to say it. There's so much about this series that I love, and I just cannot wait for more of it. It's just a phenomenal series that, again, easily cements itself as one of my favorite anime of all time. And that is it. That is my top 10 favorite anime of all time for right now, and it'll probably change in 2 minutes. I have tons of honorable mentions that I can go through. I'm actually thinking of possibly just doing like a series of videos where I just do 10 more anime, but Ascendance of Bookworm almost made it into the list. I really wanted to put it in there. Serial Experiments Lane, I love to death. It's an absolute classic, but it's also one of those series that's hard to sell to people now because it's like it was ahead of its time back then, but now it's behind the times now. Onimai, I absolutely adore that series. It's just so much fun. It was so cute, so wholesome. Death Note was incredible. Clannad, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, Oshinoko here recently, Haibane Renmei, Mars Comes In Like a Lion, Violet Evergarden, Hanazaki Roha, Keion, Eccentric Family, Aria the Animation, Kaguya-sama Love is War, Bacano, From the New World, Fate Zero, Gatchaman Crowds, Bunny Drop, Made in Abyss, Summertime Render. I can keep going on and on and on. I love anime. Like I said before, I adore anime. I will always love anime, and I love sharing anime. So hopefully you guys found something interesting in this list. If you didn't, I apologize, but still make sure to hit that like button down below. I really love you guys' support. Again, before you leave, make sure to leave a comment saying what your favorite anime of all time is. I love to hear from you guys. And again, if anybody hates my list, they might find something really good down there. But I appreciate you guys. But yeah, if you want to support this content, you like this content, I have a link down in the description below to support through Patreon or tips, links, and all that kind of stuff. I appreciate you guys. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe before you leave. And until next time, y'all take care.